Hello, Milwaukee Bucks fans. Welcome back to Bucks Latest presented by Fan Arch. I'm your host, Dean Simon. Please make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on those post notifications to stay up to date and in the know with all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates. All right, so first thing we have on the docket is that Damian Lillard gave some time for a recent interview the other day with the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, basically detailing his unexpected exit from the Milwaukee Bucks, of course, after he was waived and stretched, and now the Bucks have to pay him $22.5 million annually. I'll bring that up every single time I talk about the wave and stretch deal. But anyways, after 2 years with the Bucks and the torn Achilles, of course, both of those playoff runs were seriously hampered by injuries, and he suffered his fair share of injuries in the regular season. Of course, the blood clot this past year, and then leading into the Achilles tear. But after he was waived by the Bucks, he sat down or did a phone call interview with the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel, and he kind of just described the feelings of going through a departure of which he did in the case of being waived as a superstar player. And for a guy like Damian Lillard, who for the first 11, 12 years of his career, he was the Portland Trailblazers franchise player. And while the Trailblazers didn't necessarily bring in the right pieces to complement Dame, even though he did drag them to a conference finals one year, they didn't do everything they could for him. But still, he was their idol. He was their golden boy. And now going from that to then 2 years later, after the blockbuster deal getting him from Portland to Milwaukee, now he's waived and picked up as an unexpected free agent. It's definitely a different feeling for him, a different situation than he would have ever anticipated going into the 2024-25 season. And he said of the wave, quote, "It definitely showed me a colder side to the business," he acknowledged. "Only because, like, I give a lot of credit to the Bucks organization. I tell people it's a top of the line organization, just with how they prioritize the best things for the players. They worked with me a lot in facilitating how I could stay connected with my kids over my 2 years there. They were very supportive of what I needed to be doing for myself. That was great during my time there." And of course, that was a big part of Damian Lillard's tenure with the Bucks, that it kind of, I won't say it put a strain on his relationship with his family, because he was obviously able to stay well connected with his family and his children. But that was a little bit of a downside or a con to his time in Milwaukee, that he was away from his family for so long, and that he was basically there alone for most of the time, going through what he had to go through, and working out alone, and just going through those 2 years separated from his family. So that was a big portion of it. But like I just said, it was just such an unfamiliar situation for a guy like Damian Lillard, where he is an NBA top 75 player of all time, and a former MVP candidate, and one of the best offensive players at the point guard position, one of the best scorers at the point guard position that we have ever seen. That was just such a change, just such a switch up in stance and situation for a guy that was an all-star the past 2 years with the Bucks. It's not like he, you know, was the type of player that would be put in a situation to be waived and stretched. But of course, that's what happened, because he wouldn't be playing all of next year. Became a free agent, returned to Portland, and there's not really anything. I am a big proponent of staying positive about Damian Lillard's time with the Bucks, because Dame has wanted to win since stepping into the league. That's just the number one goal in his mind. Like, he wants to win a championship. He wanted to win a championship with the Trailblazers. Of course, they never really, again, put the right pieces around him, but he is a winner at heart. And I know that he wanted to bring a championship to Milwaukee alongside Giannis, but it just didn't work out. And now that he has returned to his family in Portland, I'm very happy for him. And I hope that when he finally does return in 2026, 27, that he can actually contribute to a winning team, because they have some players over there, some guys that could develop into real difference makers, like Tumani Kamara, who was an all defensive caliber player this past year, and others like Scoot Henderson that can develop, and Donovan Clingan, Shaden Sharp. They're just a very underrated team, kind of oozing with young talent. And I hope Dame can at least impart some wisdom on those guys if he's not able to impact things necessarily on the court. Next up, we have a little update about Giannis, a pretty positive one at that. And it's from Spot Track's Keith Smith, and he spoke with an anonymous Milwaukee Bucks front office executive uh, a little while back. And in their conversation, he got some updates as to how Giannis is feeling in terms of his relationship with John Horst and with the front office. And if things will change going into the future regarding all of the trade requests saga and all that kind of different stuff. And this anonymous executive said, quote, "We have no indication that anything is really changing as far as our relationship with the player we think is the best in the world. We rebuilt on the fly in a really challenging situation, but we think we did it as well as it could be done." And you can't really argue with that. I feel like most people outside of the Milwaukee Bucks sphere are going to severely downplay this offseason for the Bucks, but truth be told, they really made the best out of their situation and brought back obviously several key guys like Gary Trent Jr., like Torian Prince, Ryan Rollins, uh, and Kevin Porter Jr., Bobby Portis, lost Brooke Lopez and others, but they really made the best out of this offseason that they possibly could, knowing that Damian Lillard's going to miss all of next year. You get rid of him, still have to pay him his money, but you get in Miles Turner. I feel like people are severely underrating not just Miles Turner as the player or as the acquisition for the Bucks, but just the likelihood of any of this kind of stuff happening. Of course, in the moment, everybody was shocked, but then 2, 3 days after it was announced that Dame has waived, Miles Turner is heading to Milwaukee to pair in the front court with Giannis, it was like people got used to it already. But that was not an expected move or anything that was brewing in the background. That was just a complete surprise and just a phenomenal job by the Bucks front office to bring in a player that you can argue is a real needle pusher or not. But Miles Turner is a sensational two-way big, floor spacing big that could pair perfectly with Giannis, and that wasn't seen as a possibility. But the Bucks front office made the best out of a bad situation and brought in Miles Turner, and now the rest will soon to be history. With regard to if Giannis really wants to stick around for the future, if he feels like his partnership with Miles Turner and others could lead to championship contention. Who knows what Giannis is truly thinking about his near future with the Bucks? But it seems as though the Bucks front office accomplished their goal of again just making the best out of a really unfortunate and untimely situation. And I would really argue that this next segment too, I feel like it's a little bit underrated, like in terms of the Bucks front office and their dealings this offseason. So an NBA writer, senior NBA writer from Yahoo Sports, Ben Rohrbach, he gave the Milwaukee Bucks. Of course, he was grading all of the Eastern Conference teams in terms of their free agency dealings and how they're projected to go into next season, like their over under win totals and key addition subtractions. And he gave the Milwaukee Bucks a B grade. And maybe this is just a little bit of bias, but I feel like that could be raised to maybe a B plus. I don't know if you could really take it there, but in Rohrbach's explanation, he really only mentioned that Miles Turner was brought in to replace the outgoing Brooke Lopez, and that Miles Turner is unquestionably a better player at this point than Brooke, but mentioned Miles Turner coming in for Brooke, and then mentioned the $22.5 million going out annually until 2030 for Dame, and that was really it. Uh, on top of Miles Turner, he mentioned the Micic acquisition, and then he was quickly bought out, and then he's going to pursue other things overseas, and Gary Harris and the subtractions, but no mention of any of the re-signings where there's several guys like Gary Trent Jr., like Torian Prince, who I've said in recent episodes, they could have signed elsewhere. I mean, I'm not exactly an expert in their markets over this past summer, but they could have signed elsewhere for what I would imagine to be $8, $10 million annually. They were really like they were impactful players for the Bucks this year as key role players, as key, you know, semi go-to guys, at least in the closing of the regular season and then in the postseason with reference to Gary Trent Jr., a little less for Torian Prince. But those are two guys that could have commanded a little bit more salary, but instead of accepting a 2 year, $16 million deal. You got Gary Trent back for 2 years and seven and a half, and around the same for Torian Prince. That was completely unexpected in my book, and I really thought that they were going to be demanding a little more money after the sensational regular seasons that they both had, both ranking towards the top of the NBA in 3-point percentage. They could have, again, as I stated in recent episodes, used that leverage and commanded a higher salary, but they didn't. They chose to stay with the Milwaukee Bucks on a team friendly deal, and there's really no mention of that. There's really no mention of bringing back Ryan Rollins again on a longer term team friendly deal, Bobby Portis on a longer term team friendly deal. Uh, Most of the Bucks' damage was done in the re-signing department and bringing back their key guys. And of course, this past year, it's not like they were a real championship contender and you needed to bring back all of these really skilled guys to stay in contention. But these guys are solid options that could fit very well on championship contending teams elsewhere, but instead they're going to work together to, work alongside Giannis and hopefully push the Bucks towards the top of the Eastern Conference in a decidedly weak Eastern Conference. So the re-signing of all these guys, bringing back Chris Livingston, I thought was one of the biggest pluses of the offseason for the Milwaukee Bucks so far. With all these things in mind, I feel like that B could be bumped up to maybe a B plus. But of course, we're going to see in the next couple of years that their dealings from this year, again, the 22.5 million in dead cap from Damian Lillard, that's really going to impact team building in a very negative way moving forward. So we're going to see how that all plays out. But last thing I wanted to mention too, even though this isn't the biggest update of all time, Bill Simmons, who we know isn't necessarily the greatest in terms of reporting on Bucks details and situations, and he's inherently negative when it comes to the Bucks most of the time. Around last week, he said that the Bucks, when they made the Miles Turner move, when they waived Damian Lillard, Bill Simmons said on his podcast that it was one of the most desperate moves that he had ever seen of free agency, and that it was going to blow up in the Bucks' faces and that it was going to be disastrous. But then just a week later, it seems as though with again all the Bucks' extra moves around the margins, re-signing all these key guys for team-friendly deals, and bringing in a guy like Cole Anthony, who's going to add some instant offense off the bench, probably in a sixth man type role or seventh man behind Bobby Portis, he seems to have completely switched up on his opinion of the Milwaukee Bucks prior to the beginning of the 2025-26 season. He said just a little while ago, and I quote, the team's going to be pretty good. They actually had a really good offseason when you consider the second best player on the team, who is supposed to make $50 million, was Damian Lillard, is going to miss the whole season. The Cole Anthony thing was a big deal. He's a rotation guy. They kept Trent for nothing. He's a rotation guy. They've added together a team that in a weak conference with the best player in the game, Giannis, I think they have at least now more of a puncher's chance. So now you realize it. Now you see that all of these separate moves can come together to make somewhat of a decent team around Giannis. That a guy like Gary Trent Jr. can potentially add a bunch of offensive firepower if he's hitting threes at a 41, 42% clip. If Torian Prince is hitting threes at a 43% clip. If AJ Green's doing the same thing. If Ryan Rollins develops into the kind of two-way athlete that we think he can be and develops as a pick and roll ball handler and great decision maker. If Kevin Porter Jr. can be a consistent scorer. If Cole Anthony can boost his efficiency, all of these different moving parts can really lead to, I don't think I'm crazy to say it, the Bucks sneakily becoming a 50-win team and maybe even pushing it a little bit more if Giannis has another generational type season that he's had for the past 2-3 years running. The Bucks can be a dangerous group in the Eastern Conference, though. If they were to get to the finals and they have to play the excuse me, the Thunder or the Rockets or the Nuggets or the Clippers or any of these Titan teams in the West, maybe it's a different story in terms of their chances to really contend for a title. But with a wide open East with all of these different moves, the Bucks made the best out of a bad situation, and it seems as though they can maybe be a top 4, top 5 team in the East, and I don't think that's ridiculous to say. But anyways, that'll be it for me today. Thank you very much for watching another episode of Bucks Latest presented by FanArch. I've been Dean Simon. Again, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn on those post notifications to stay up to date and in the know with all the latest Milwaukee Bucks updates. I'll see you guys in the next one, and go Bucks.